Growing up in a small, close-knit town, I was surrounded by familiar faces and tight connections. Family ties, friendships, and loyalty were the bedrock of our lives. It wasn't until much later that I realized just how fragile those bonds could truly be. My twin brother, Larry, and I shared almost everything, or so I believed. Although we looked alike, we couldn't have been more different in personality. I enjoyed tinkering with machines and helping out at our dad's junkyard, while Larry gravitated toward the art of persuasion and salesmanship. As the years went by, life started to expose the tiny fractures in relationships we had once taken for granted. What I didn't foresee was how those subtle cracks would eventually widen into a deep chasm. My life took a significant turn when I married Abigail, a strong, independent woman with a successful career in insurance. Together, we built a home and what seemed like an idyllic marriage. But over time, I began to notice small, unsettling changes in her behavior. Little things felt off, and though I couldn't put my finger on it, a nagging sense of mistrust began to creep in. I never could have imagined how that uneasiness would unravel not just my marriage, but also the delicate peace between my brother and me. It's incredible how fast life can shift. My world took a sharp turn on the day I went on a fishing trip with some close friends. Meanwhile, Abby was at work when she received a phone call that would upend everything. "Is this Abigail Bell?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes, speaking." "Who is this?" she replied, already uneasy. "We have your husband," the caller said coldly. "He's been taken hostage, and we're demanding a ransom of $250,000. You have 24 hours to deliver the money, or he'll be eliminated. Do not involve the police or he dies. Expect another call at 3 p.m. with further instructions." Shocked and terrified, Abby tried to keep her composure. "What? Who is this? Is this some kind of joke?" she stammered. The chilling tone of the caller's voice left her frozen with fear, unsure of what to do next. At the time, I was enjoying a fishing trip with Joe and Al, two close friends, at Lake Erie. We had decided to disconnect completely, leaving our phones behind so we could fully relax. My 35-foot boat comfortably fit the three of us, and we were having a blast drinking beer and fishing, a rare treat for us. We'd been doing this annual fishing and camping trip for 6 years, and it was something we all looked forward to. But while we were relaxing, a Coast Guard boat sped toward us, sirens blaring. Armed officers drew their weapons as they pulled up beside us. "Is one of you Terry Bell?" one officer asked. "That's me," I replied, stunned. "What's going on? Why are you pointing guns at us?" "Sir, we received information that you were kidnapped and being held for ransom," the officer explained. Confused, I tried to reassure them. "I'm fine. These are my friends, Joe and Al. We're just here to fish for a few days without any distractions. Now, can you please lower those weapons?" The officers insisted on searching the boat, asking if we had any weapons on board. "Just the usual safety gear like flares," I told them. After thoroughly checking the boat and confirming our identities, they apologized but said I needed to come ashore to speak with the police. I turned to Joe and Al. "You guys keep fishing. If I don't make it back to the cabin tonight, make sure everything's locked up and the boat is secure." As I left with the Coast Guard, my thoughts drifted to Joe and Al. We had met in prison 12 years earlier. I had been convicted of receiving stolen property and served 3 years, a story I'll explain later. Joe and Al were there for different reasons. They'd both discovered their wives cheating and attacked the men involved. Though they were originally facing attempted homicide charges, plea deals reduced their sentences to assault. Despite our rough beginnings, the three of us became close friends, watching each other's backs during our time in prison. After my release, I promised to help them when they came up for parole. My dad owned an auto parts warehouse where I'd worked since high school, and after his passing, I took over the business. During their parole hearings, I assured the board they'd have jobs at the warehouse and a place to live in trailers near the site. With stable employment and housing secured, both were granted parole 8 years ago. Both Joe and Al had been incredibly thankful to my dad and me for helping them turn their lives around. They proved to be exceptional workers, skilled and dependable. Over the years, they saved enough money to buy used cars and eventually transitioned into mechanics and tow truck drivers for emergency roadside services. They were true jacks of all trades, capable of handling anything that came their way at the junkyard. All they had needed was a second chance. They even started dating, eventually marrying, and buying homes of their own. Despite their new lives, they never forgot their roots and were always grateful to my father and me for giving them the opportunity to rebuild. They continued to work for the family business, earning good wages, and their loyalty never wavered. The police gave me a lift home since I didn't have my car. As soon as I stepped through the door, Abby ran up and threw her arms around me. "Oh, thank God you're okay. I've been so worried," she said, her voice trembling. "Where've you been?" she asked. "Out on the lake, fishing," I said. "At least I was until the Coast Guard pulled up with guns drawn." "What the hell is going on?" Before Abby could answer, a man stepped forward and introduced himself. "I'm Detective Abel. I'm leading the investigation. We need to know where you've been for the past 24 hours. "You're kidding me," I shot back. "You dragged me away from my fishing trip, and I'm the one answering questions? How about you tell me what this is all about first?" "Fair enough," the detective replied. "Your wife called us this morning after receiving a disturbing phone call at work. The caller claimed you'd been kidnapped and was demanding $250,000 in ransom. They said they'd call your house at 3 p.m. with further instructions. We've set up here to intercept the call." I stared at him, dumbfounded. This has got to be some kind of sick joke. Who the hell would kidnap me? I own an auto parts warehouse and a trailer park. What are they after, spare parts or a busted lawnmower? "Abby, did they say anything else?" Tears welled up in Abby's eyes as she recounted the call. "They said I had 24 hours to raise the money or they'd kill you. And if I called the police, they'd do it immediately. I didn't know what to do, but I was so scared. I called anyway. I had to." She started sobbing, and Detective Abel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Bell, you did the right thing," he said. "You couldn't handle this alone." I shook my head, frustrated. "That's easy for you to say. It wasn't your life on the line. Now that I'm here and clearly fine, can't you all just leave?" "Mr. Bell, we have to treat threats like this seriously," the detective said firmly. "We'll stay to see if the call comes in. In the meantime, can you account for your whereabouts over the last 24 hours? "Of course," I said. "Joe and Al picked me up early yesterday morning. We rented a cabin by the lake for 4 days. We spent the day fishing, made dinner at the cabin, and hung out. This morning we had breakfast before the Coast Guard found us. That's it. You know the rest." By the time I finished explaining, it was nearly 3 o'clock. Detective Abel had set up a phone beacon in the kitchen. Abby was prepared to answer the call, while I sat in the living room with 2 other detectives, nursing a cup of coffee. A speakerphone on the coffee table allowed everyone to listen in. Detective Abel told Abby to let the caller know she had contacted a lawyer to help gather the ransom. He would pose as the lawyer if necessary. Meanwhile, I sat there shaking my head in disbelief. "Damn it, I could still be out there fishing," I muttered to one of the officers. At exactly 3 o'clock, the phone rang. Abby picked up immediately. "Mrs. Bell," the disguised voice began. "Glad to see you made it home for my call. Is the money ready?" "Not yet," Abby replied, trying to stay calm. "I contacted a lawyer to help me get the funds." The voice instantly grew harsher. "What? I told you not to contact anyone. Your husband is as good as dead if you brought in the cops. Did you?" "No. No police, just a lawyer. I didn't know how else to get that much money." "Please don't hurt my husband," she pleaded. "Put the lawyer on the phone," the voice demanded. Abby handed the phone to Detective Abel, who smoothly played his role. "This is John Wells, the Bell family attorney. What do you need from me?" "We need the money or Bell dies. Is that clear enough for you? If we find out the cops are involved, he's dead. This isn't a game. And I'm not playing," Abel shot back. "Before we hand over that kind of money, we need proof that you have Mr. Bell and that he's alive." There was a pause, followed by muffled noises on the other end. Then we heard a voice. Abby, it's me, Larry. My brother's voice was shaky. These guys grabbed me right after you left the hotel this morning. Just give them what they want, please. A loud thud cut him off like someone getting punched. I shot up from the couch. What the hell? That's my idiot brother Larry. What does he mean you were with him this morning, Abby? The caller's voice turned smug. Looks like your sweet Abby hasn't been entirely honest with you, Mr. Bell. Was that your husband in the background, Abby? Does he know you've been sneaking around with his brother? Wore out his welcome and moved on to the next. Larry had a pattern. Charm his way into someone's life, take what he could, and leave behind a mess. It didn't surprise me that he was up to his old tricks, but it enraged me that he dragged Abby into it. Back in the living room, the detective tried to make sense of everything. He looked between me and Abby, his notebook in hand, while two officers stood nearby, watching us closely. Mr. Bell, Detective Abel started, despite the personal situation, we need your cooperation. Your brother's life is at stake. I scoffed. His life ain't worth 300 grand. Let those kidnappers deal with him. He deserves it for the mess he's caused. Abby was sobbing quietly on the couch. She had her hands clasped, her eyes red and swollen. She tried to speak, but the words barely came out. Terry, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to get this bad. I didn't. Save it. I snapped, cutting her off. You didn't mean for what? To betray me with my own brother? To embarrass me like this? You've done plenty, Abby, and I don't care to hear excuses. The detective cleared his throat, trying to refocus the conversation. Mrs. Bell, when did your relationship with Larry begin? Abby hesitated, glancing at me, then at the detective. It was a few months ago. It started when he came to the warehouse looking for a job. Terry wasn't around that day and we got to talking. It just happened. It just happened? I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. It just happened because Larry's a snake, and you're too damn gullible to see it. He's been pulling this crap his whole life. And you let him drag you into his games. The officers stepped closer, ready to intervene, but I held up a hand. Relax. I'm not about to hit anyone. I just can't believe the gall of these two. Abby was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. I made a mistake, Terry. I didn't know how to stop it once it started. You knew exactly what you were doing, I said coldly, turning back to the detective. What's the plan? Because I'm not paying these jerks, and I sure as hell don't care what happens to Larry. Detective Abel sighed, clearly frustrated. We don't negotiate with criminals, Mr. Bell, but we can't risk your brother's life either. We'll work on tracing the call and setting up a sting operation. In the meantime, I'd advise both of you to remain calm. Calm? I laughed bitterly. Detective, my wife just admitted to sleeping with my brother. He's been kidnapped, and someone's demanding a ransom. Calm left the building a long time ago. The detective didn't reply. Instead, he signaled to one of the officers, who started making calls, likely to coordinate the next steps. I slumped back onto the couch, staring blankly at the TV. The room was tense, silent except for Abby's muffled sobs and the occasional crackle of the police radio. My mind was spinning, bouncing between anger, betrayal, and a strange sense of relief. At least now I knew the truth about Abby and Larry. It hurt, sure, but it also set me free. As the clock ticked toward the next day, I realized one thing. No matter how this played out, my life was never going to be the same. Hesitate to put that money to good use. We expanded the business, buying new equipment and hiring more staff. For the first time in years, I felt like things were looking up. Abby seemed genuinely supportive, and I believed I'd found someone who wouldn't betray me like Beth or Larry had. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the shadows of the past. Larry's betrayal, Beth's abandonment, and the years I lost in prison haunted me. I kept telling myself Abby was different. She wasn't like the others. I'd learned my lesson. I was cautious, protective of what I had built, and determined not to let anyone take advantage of me again. For the first few years, our marriage seemed solid. Abby helped manage the books for the business, and we built a life together. The salvage yard thrived. My father's cousins continued working hard, and Al and Joe proved loyal employees. The business was more than just a way to make money. It was my sanctuary, a place where I felt in control. Larry, on the other hand, was living it up with Cora. Despite the prenup, he managed to worm his way into her life enough to enjoy her wealth. They hosted lavish parties, went on extravagant vacations, and kept up appearances of being the perfect couple. I avoided their gatherings whenever I could, but when Cora insisted, I'd reluctantly show up, knowing Larry would never miss an opportunity to flaunt his so-called success in front of me. It was at one of those parties that the first cracks in my marriage appeared. Abby had a little too much wine and spent the evening laughing at Larry's jokes and smiling at his stories. It bothered me, but I told myself she was just being polite. Larry was charismatic. That's how he fooled so many people. But a small part of me couldn't ignore the way he looked at her or how she seemed to light up around him. I started noticing little things after that. Abby would come home later than usual, claiming she had to work late. She'd leave the room when her phone rang, brushing it off as work calls. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my instincts told me something was off. One day, I decided to follow her after she left the house, claiming she was meeting a friend for lunch. She drove straight to a motel on the outskirts of town. My heart sank as I watched her step out of the car and walk into a room. Larry was waiting for her at the door. I sat in my truck for what felt like hours, staring at the motel door, my mind racing. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. After everything Larry had done to me, after all the years I'd spent rebuilding my life, here he was, tearing it apart again. When Abby finally left the motel, I followed her home but didn't say a word. I needed time to think, to figure out what I was going to do. Confronting her wouldn't change the fact that she'd betrayed me, just like Beth had. And Larry? He wasn't worth the fight. He thrived on drama, and I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could control, my business. I called my lawyer the next morning and started making arrangements to protect my assets. If Abby thought she was going to walk away with a piece of what I'd built, she had another thing coming. As for Larry, I knew he'd get what was coming to him eventually. Guys like him always do. Would never do that. You're just trying to blame him for your own problems. Her voice was shrill, her face flushed with anger, but her reaction only confirmed what I already knew. Abby, stop it, I said calmly, though my insides churned. You've been caught. Larry's not some innocent victim in all of this, and neither are you. The room fell silent for a moment. Cora's sobs were the only sound as she shook her head in disbelief. I couldn't blame her. It wasn't every day you found out your husband and your best friend were betraying you together. Detective Abel cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Let's focus. Mrs. Belcora. Did Larry have any large debts from gambling that you're aware of? Cora nodded, wiping her tears. Yes, he did. He owed thousands to different people. Some were private lenders, others were not the kind of people you'd want to owe money to. Do you have names? The detective pressed. I'll get you a list, Cora said, her voice trembling. But I can tell you one name off the top of my head, Tony Marquez. He's a loan shark based in Cleveland. Larry borrowed from him last year. Abel jotted down the name and stood up. We'll follow up on this. In the meantime, no one leaves town without informing us. And Abby, he said, turning to her. If you know anything else, now's the time to come clean. Abby crossed her arms and glared at me. I've told you everything I know. I doubted that, but I let it go for the moment. As the detective and his team left, the weight of everything hit me. My brother had been a thorn in my side for years, but this was something else entirely. Cora stayed for a while, sitting quietly with her hands wrapped around the beer I'd handed her earlier. I can't believe I trusted him, she said softly. And Abby, she was like a sister to me. Believe me, I know how you feel, I replied. Larry's been betraying me for as long as I can remember. I just didn't think he'd stoop this low. We sat in silence for a while before Cora stood up. I'm going to get that list for the detective. And Terry, thank you for telling me the truth, even if it hurt. After she left, I turned to Abby, who was still sitting on the couch, arms folded tightly. "You've got some explaining to do," I said. Her eyes flashed with anger. "I don't owe you anything, Terry. You're not perfect either, you know?" "Maybe not," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I never lied to you. I never betrayed you. And I sure as hell never put our lives at risk by getting involved with someone like Larry." Abby didn't respond. Instead, she stood up and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Larry was still out there, caught up in God knows what. Abby had destroyed what little trust one had left, and now I had to decide what to do next. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let anyone drag me down again. Not Abby, not Larry, not anyone. The only question was how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. "Found Larry inside, shaken and weak but alive," Abel finished, leaning back in his chair. "He's lucky to be breathing after everything he's been through. Honestly, it's a miracle the hijackers didn't do worse." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "So what's next? Do you think you'll catch them?" Abel shrugged. "We're working on it. The tracker gave us some information, but the hijackers ditched the car and the suitcase not long after the drop-off. They were careful, but everyone makes mistakes eventually. We've got a few leads." "Leads aren't exactly reassuring," I said. "These guys went through a lot of trouble to get the money. What's stopping them from trying something else?" "We're taking precautions," Abel replied. "That's why I wanted to check in on you. If you really were the intended target, you need to stay alert." "Don't worry about me," I said with a half-smile. "I'll be fine. Sounds like Larry's the one who needs to watch his back." Abel didn't argue, which told me he agreed. "One more thing," he said. "Do you have any idea why Larry might have been targeted? Any enemies he might have made?" I snorted. "Larry makes enemies everywhere he goes. Between his gambling, his affairs, and his general lack of morals, it's a wonder he hasn't gotten into more trouble before now." Abel gave me a pointed look. "Be that as it may, we still need to figure out why this happened. If you think of anything, give me a call." "Sure," I said, though I doubted I'd have anything useful to add. The detectives left not long after, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Larry was safe, but the damage had been done. Abby had drained her savings to bail him out, and now she'd have to face the fallout from her actions. As for me, I was done playing the fool. When Joe and Al returned with their wives later that evening, I told them what had happened. Their reactions were a mix of shock and anger, though Joe was quick to offer his support. "You need anything, Terry, you let us know," he said firmly. "Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it." The next morning, I packed up my things and left the cabin. I needed time to think, to figure out what my next move would be. Abby had betrayed me, Larry had betrayed me, and the only thing I was sure of was that I couldn't trust either of them. As I drove back to the city, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something bigger. The hijackers were still out there, and their motives remained a mystery. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of me again. Larry might have gotten away this time, but I had a feeling his luck was about to run out. And when it did, I'd be there to make sure he finally faced the consequences of his actions. For now, though, I had bigger things to deal with, starting with getting Abby out of my house and out of my life for good. I gave Alan and his family a ride home since they didn't have a car with them on this trip. The drive back was filled with light conversation about the fishing and how much fun their kids had at the cabin. It was a nice distraction from everything going on. After dropping them off, I headed back to my motel. The room was small, but it was quiet, and that was all I needed. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. My brother's betrayal, Abby's lies, the hijacking. It was almost too much to process. The next morning, I got ready to meet Cora. I wasn't sure if it was the thought of seeing her or just the idea of moving forward with the divorce, but I felt lighter somehow. When I got to the lawyer's office, Cora was already there, standing outside. She looked stunning, even in her usual business attire. "Ready?" she asked. "Yeah, let's get this over with," I said. We had our meetings separately, but once we were done, we decided to grab lunch. At the restaurant, Cora picked at her shrimp scampi while we talked about the next steps. "I'm going to sell the house," she said. "I don't want to stay there. Too many bad memories." "I get that," I replied. "I'm thinking about remodeling my place, changing things up. Feels like it's time for something new." Cora nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? How everything turned out. But sitting here with you, it feels like maybe this is how it was meant to be." Her words caught me off guard. "I've always cared about you, Cora," I said after a moment. "But I never thought we'd be sitting here, having this conversation." "Me neither," she said. "But maybe we both deserve a fresh start after everything." We finished lunch and said goodbye. I couldn't help but feel like something had shifted, like maybe the worst was behind us. When I got back to the cabin that evening, everything was in order. Al and Joe had cleaned up, and the place felt peaceful again. I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like things might actually turn out okay. Sunday evening, I called Abby from the motel. "I hope you're packing because I'll be home Monday after work, and you'd better be gone, or you'll regret it," I said. It was a threat, and I didn't care. I wasn't sure I'd actually do anything, but I was dead set on throwing her out. She tried to bring up money and the divorce, but I cut her off. "It's all in the prenup," I told her. "You'll get what you came in with. The house and almost everything in it stays with me." When she claimed most of her money was gone because she gave it to Larry, I replied coldly, "You can thank my brother for that. Talk to him. Maybe he can return some of it." She got angry. "You're a horrible, pathetic person. You would let your brother die." "I didn't do anything," I shot back. "If he hadn't been fooling around with my wife, I might have helped him. Anyway, I'm seeing a lawyer on Monday. You'll be served with divorce papers later this week. I suggest you sign them." On Monday, after I got back from the lawyer's office, Cora called me at work. "Larry stopped by my house to pick up his things," she said. "He had a small trailer. I told him to take only what belonged to him." She added that Larry had tried to apologize again, but she wasn't interested. I told him I'd be mailing the divorce papers to his company's office in Youngstown. As he was leaving, I saw Abby in a car following him. "I think she rented a truck. Your idiot brother probably helped her move her stuff." Cora also told me she had scared Larry by mentioning that I'd had dinner with her on Saturday. "He said if he ever saw you again, you'd be a dead man," she said, laughing. "I never said that, but I guess it scared the hell out of him." She also informed Detective Abel that she canceled all of Larry's credit cards, both the ones in his name and the shared ones. "I'm done paying his bills," she said. Abel was still keeping an eye out for any activity on the stolen cards, though the case had been put on the back burner now that Larry was found. Work slowly returned to normal. Cora and I started having dinner at least twice a week. We both filed for divorce, and the lawyers said it would take about 90 days. Neither Abby nor Larry contested the divorce, which surprised us both. But with the prenuptial agreements in place, contesting would have been pointless. Over the next month, Cora and I grew closer. She confided in me about things she hadn't shared before. A few months earlier, Larry had gone to Las Vegas and forged her name to withdraw over $100,000. She only found out when she saw the bank statement while Larry was supposedly on a 2-day trip to Pittsburgh. "At first, I just wanted to confront him," she said. "But then I started to wonder why he did it. I think the money went to cover gambling debts, or maybe there was another woman." Cora had asked me to check Abby and Larry's schedules back then, and it turned out they'd both been out of town that weekend. Abby had gone to Iowa to visit her sister. The revelation made me even more frustrated. "I need some payback," I told Cora, "but I know I need to wait. Too little time has passed since the hijacking." Later, we found out that Abby and Larry were living together just outside Cleveland. They were renting an apartment and still working, though we didn't know if they were happy. "It's over," Cora said. "Just leave it alone." She also mentioned something Larry had said. "He thinks you're a fool for going to jail to protect your father. There's no way he would have done that." Cora looked at me and smiled. "I think it was a beautiful, heroic thing to do for your dad." I realized then that I was falling in love with her. Being around her felt right, like I was finally where I belonged. One evening, I asked her, "When our divorces are final, would you marry me?" We hadn't even made love yet, but I meant every word. "Terry, are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, her voice soft. "I'm probably not the best lover, considering my husband wanted another woman." She smiled, though, and didn't say no. "Our divorces will be final next month," I said. "Let's celebrate, spend the night together, and then you can decide." I already know how I feel. A month later, we both received our finalized divorce papers in the same week. Cora said she wanted to get away for the weekend, just the two of us. I decided to take her to Pittsburgh and booked us a stay at the Sharon Inn, a great spot to explore the city. We left on Friday, driving through Youngstown, crossing the Ohio River into West Virginia, and then we reached Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I stopped in Youngstown for gas using my credit card. Then I made a large deposit in the overnight box at Chase Bank. I meant to deposit this before leaving, but since it's the same bank, I'll drop it off here. "It's too much money to carry around," I told Cora. We had dinner at the Sharon, and it felt great to be with her. After dinner, a few drinks, and some quiet conversation, we went up to the room and made love. The next morning, we explored the city, visiting the Carnegie Institute and museum. Later, we decided to catch a baseball game. We weren't Pirates fans, being from Cleveland, but we acted like kids and had a blast. After the game, we went out for dinner again, then returned to the hotel for cocktails and some dancing. It was just nice being together. I couldn't believe my brother had cheated on a woman like Cora. She was beautiful, fun, wonderful, and a great lover. Everything I could ever want in a girlfriend or wife. The next day, we headed back to Cleveland, passing through Steubenville and a few small Amish towns. We stopped for some shopping and sightseeing along the way. I dropped Cora off at her house and told her I'd like to see her Monday after work. On Monday, she cooked us dinner. She was an amazing cook, too. After we finished eating, there was a knock at the door. Cora answered it. "Mrs. Bell, may I come in? I have a few questions for you." "Of course, come in," she said. "Terry, Detective Abel is here." I walked into the room, and Abel looked a little surprised to see me. "Before you say anything," I started, "Cora and I have been seeing each other. This only started after we both found out about our ex's cheating. You're both adults. What you do is your business," Abel said. "I have a few questions about the credit cards you canceled that were stolen," he continued. "Do you still have a list?" "Yes, it's in the desk." "I'll get it," Cora replied. She handed the list to Detective Abel. "What's this about?" Cora asked. "I noticed you canceled the Chase card you both used. Is that right?" "Yes, why?" she asked. "Your husband had another Chase card he used last Friday at a gas station in Youngstown," Abel said. "Larry was at his corporate office in Youngstown on Friday," Cora replied. "He said he didn't use that card. He said it was stolen." "I only canceled the cards I had duplicates of," Cora explained. "I didn't know he had another Chase card." "Was my name on that card?" I asked. "No," Abel said. "He claimed it was his alone. He ordered a new card but hadn't used it." "So what do you want from me?" Cora asked. "I just need to confirm the cards you canceled. That's all," Abel said. "Sounds like Larry's problem, not mine," Cora said. "You're right," Abel agreed. "But I needed to check. That card wasn't just used for gas, it was also used for an overnight deposit. Someone put $100,000 into an account that already had $75,000. I was shocked. Someone put $100,000 into Larry's savings account? Who else could have done that but Larry himself? Abel replied. "Did you ask him?" I asked. "Yes," Abel said. "He didn't have much to say. Your ex-wife was there, demanding to know where the money came from and why he didn't tell her about the $75,000. Larry just clammed up and refused to answer. "You may be right about your brother, Mr. Bell," Abel continued, "but we can't prove anything. We're just tracking the stolen cards." Larry claimed this card wasn't stolen, but he was uncertain. After Abel left, Cora looked at me, her eyes full of questions. I knew she wanted to talk, so I decided to be straightforward. Cora, are you going to marry me? I asked. Terry, I care about you. I really do, she said softly. But I have one big problem. What's that? I asked. I'm sure we can work through it. It's about the hijacking, Cora said. I have a feeling you know more than you've told me. If we get married, I need to be able to trust you. I've been married twice, and both my husbands lied to me, not just about cheating. I don't want that again. I smiled, though I felt a pang of guilt. Why do you think I know more? I asked. We were in Youngstown on Friday, she said calmly. You got gas and stopped at Chase Bank to make a deposit. I know you well enough to tell when you're hiding something. Did you find out about Abby and Larry and stage this hijacking to see what kind of man Larry really is? I hesitated, but I knew I owed her the truth. So what do you want to know? If I knew about it? If I was involved? I asked. I just want the truth, she said. I need to be able to trust you. And you can trust me, I replied. You made that deposit knowing I'd question it. You were sending me a message, weren't you? It was a big step for me, a step toward trust that I rarely took. Aside from Al and Joe, I hadn't fully trusted anyone else. But Cora was right. If we were going to be together, we needed to trust each other completely. All right, I said, deciding to come clean. I'll tell you everything. One of my best clients thought he saw me in Las Vegas. He said he approached a guy who looked like my twin, hugging a woman as if she were his mistress. My client greeted him with, "How the hell are you doing? You stupid son of a witch." The guy got mad and told him to back off. That's when my client realized it wasn't me. I continued. I showed him a picture of Abby and asked if that was the woman he saw. He said yes, and I told him it was my twin brother and his wife. He then said, "Damn, he was all over her like newlyweds." I played along, but I knew the truth. After that, I called Abby's sister and found out she hadn't been to Las Vegas. So I knew Abby went with Larry, and I figured you paid for the trip. I had paid for her airfare, thinking she was going to her sister's, I explained. Cora's expression tightened as I went on. I checked Abby's savings and she hadn't withdrawn any money for the trip. That's when I decided to get even. I asked a few close friends for help. The rest is history. You would have let him die? Cora asked, her voice trembling. Of course not, I said. But I wanted him to suffer. I can't stand him, but he's still my brother. I just hoped you wouldn't help bail him out. I was surprised Abby gave the money, but I'm sure she thought she'd get it back once the hijackers were caught. Why did you give Larry money on Friday? Cora asked, still processing. I got rid of all his cards except for the one in his name. After you mentioned you'd canceled the rest, I checked the balance. It was $75,000. Likely what he took from you. I used it to buy gas so Detective Abel would know the card had been used. Then I deposited the money into his account. Larry's so greedy, he'd never admit someone else put that money there, I added. And I knew it would create doubt between him and Abby. She'll always wonder if it's her money. I laughed bitterly. There's no way he can explain that kind of cash. Cora stared at me, her expression unreadable. What did you do with the rest of the money? She asked. I didn't need any of it, I said. I bought stock in my company for the two friends who helped me. $50,000 each. They now own about 4% of the company. I told them to hold on to it for now. They're happy to have a stake in the business. The remaining $100,000 is for you. The money Larry stole. I thought you could put it in the real estate account. Cora didn't know what to say. I had essentially hijacked her husband for her benefit, told her the truth, and didn't take any money for myself. She knew I did it to get back at both Abby and Larry, but I had also helped her. That's everything, I said. It's up to you whether you trust me. I love you, Cora, and I want you in my life. I promise not to lie to you. Cora looked at me for a long time, then kissed me softly. She took my hand, led me to the bedroom, and we made love. We decided to rent a cabin and have a small private wedding. It was a beautiful setting by the lake, with nature's calm all around us. Al, Joe, their families, and the rest of my staff were there. Cora's parents attended, and I finally met her sister and a few other relatives. Some of her real estate employees were also there. It was too cold to swim, but everyone enjoyed a boat ride, and we all appreciated the peaceful surroundings. No one mentioned Abby or Larry, and nothing was said about the hijacking. But I saw Cora hugging Al and Joe, realizing who my true friends were. The wedding was filled with food, music, and the warmth of family and friends. Cora's parents were surprised by how much I looked like Larry, but she quickly explained that he was my twin. After everyone left, Cora and I took a moonlit boat ride, just the two of us. It was peaceful, romantic, and the perfect way to begin our new life together. We spent 4 days at the cabin, fishing and simply enjoying each other's company. There were no distractions or drama, and it felt like we were finally free from the complications of the past. Cora and I had a business arrangement for our future. I owned my parts warehouse and she owned her real estate. In business, everything else we shared, we decided to sell both our houses and buy a condo together for a fresh start. It was wonderful coming home to her. Sometimes we went out for dinner. Other times we stayed in. Cora bonded quickly with Al and Joe's wives, who became her best friends. Since Cora couldn't have children, we often watched their kids. They started calling us Aunt Cora and Uncle Terry, and it felt like we had built a new family around us. Eventually, we even considered adoption. From what we heard, Larry and Abby weren't together anymore. Larry had apparently moved out of state, which suited me just fine. Cora mentioned seeing Abby a few times during business trips. She's gained weight and is seeing someone at her insurance firm, Cora said. But they never spoke. Abby would just shake her head whenever she saw Cora. We never heard back from Detective Abel, so I assumed the hijacking case was closed. I didn't care anymore. I had moved on. Cora and I were happy, and nothing else mattered. Our business was thriving, and the friends who helped with the hijacking were now part owners of the company, strengthening our bond. Life was good. Cora and I made a great team, both in life and in business. One day, as we sat in our condo, Cora looked at me and asked, "Terry, do you ever wonder what might have happened if things had gone differently with Larry and Abby?" I paused for a moment. Sometimes, I admitted. But then I remember that everything led us to this moment, and I wouldn't change a thing. She smiled, took my hand and said, "Me neither." We leaned back, watching the sunset over the city, knowing we had overcome life's challenges together, and that was all that really mattered.